Good morning, everybody. This is Matt Wilson with BTB Security, here for another edition of BTB Reacts. So this time, and I'm going to try going forward, there's going to be a mix of sometimes I'll know a little bit more about something because it's just been all over the news, but I intentionally avoided getting too much more than the headline on the first story I wanted to cover this week that I think everyone will find interesting. So let me pull that up and see. So this made the national news, and it's a really sensational headline. A hacker tries to poison the city of Oldmar, Florida. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Again, apologies to those that I may offend. But basically, all I saw was this headline and a bunch of different news sources. So let's actually read the story a little bit. So it looks like last week an employee noticed, and it's a relatively small city, 15,000 person, uh, not good, by the way, but the plant uses TeamViewer, okay, remote access software. Comes up pretty often. We look for it when we're doing our kind of work. And there's nothing wrong with TeamViewer. I'm not knocking TeamViewer or any other remote access software, but if you have this kind of technology in your environment, you have to make sure you have the appropriate controls and monitoring that go along with it, right? So, yeah, troubleshoot IT issues, common use case. Boss used to connect to different facility systems. I've actually worked with a couple of water authorities. I don't know if this was specifically like the city's water authority, but I've worked with a number of water authorities and other kinds of like utilities in the past, and they're almost always really good folks. But very rarely, in my experience, have they had adequate resources for information security, let alone information technology, let alone information security. So again, I don't want to be unfair here and make any harsh value judgments about these folks because I really don't know. But when you start trying to piece together how something like this could happen, it makes sense, right? They're using TeamViewer. Again, it is potentially enterprise grade software, but usually enterprises are doing something a little bit different to do this. And I did catch this part of the story where a plant operator noticed his mouse moving. And boy, oh boy, if that's your control, employee noticing activity in real time, um, that's something that's really bound for it's prone to failure, right? Um, okay, so lye. I'm not a chemist, but I know lye in small quantities can do things like I think it's used for like making soap. I want to say I got that from a movie, and I want to say it was Fight Club, which I recommend folks watch if they're of the appropriate age. But looks like 100 parts per million is their normal, and they moved it to 1,100 parts per million. Well, again, no chemist, not an environmental engineer. I couldn't tell you what that does to anything, but it certainly sounds bad, right? So I don't want to overstate it. For all I know, 11,000 parts per million or 11,100 parts per million is actually not a dangerous level. I don't know. Do they actually quote this? Did they say in low concentration? So they say at high levels it can damage things, but like what's high level, right? Does it take 100,000 parts per million for it to be considered a high level? I genuinely don't know. So, okay. So he noticed it quickly, thankfully, and automated pH testing safeguards would trigger an alarm. Great. We certainly hope all those other controls work, but when you hear like defense in depth, which is kind of a really old school concept and I don't know, tagline is the word I'm looking for. Uh, it applies. This is why you have layers of controls. The first layer failed, right? I guess the city would argue that the first layer succeeded because an employee noticed this, but I don't know. What if this bad person was doing this at 2 a.m. when the employee wasn't logged in and paying attention, or if the employee simply had turned his or her head when this activity was going on, or what if the attacker was a little bit more capable and perhaps could have gained access and elevated privileges and then just done everything without the need for remote access software, which I'm not saying is likely, or I'm saying it's possible. It's theoretically possible, right? These are all things we've seen happen in the past. So keep reading along here. Rare publicly, yeah, this is dangerous stuff. Okay, so they're just compromised team viewer. So maybe we talk for a minute as I'm kind of trying to multitask here. How did they compromise team viewer? Again, there's a number of different arrangements that this organization could have had with how they're using team viewer. My gut, my instinct is that it was probably weak privileges, right? Somewhere. It was probably a guest password or a shared password or a password that was compromised somewhere else, right? So just to give this, let's say the user account that was logged in via TeamViewer is, John Doe. Well, if John Doe has a password of password, or if John Doe's password is really strong but used somewhere else that's compromised, and then the bad person somehow gains knowledge of it, then the bad person can log in as John Doe via TeamViewer. I'm grossly oversimplifying here, but that's roughly how it's going to work. And here they're talking about industrial control systems, how it's normally segregated. Yeah. Again, in my experience, I've worked with a handful of municipalities, and I'm not commenting on any, some of this was quite some time ago, but that's not always true. I think they intend to segregate them. But what I've seen happen is it is in theory 2 different networks. Like the network diagram shows that it's 2 different networks, but practically it's one, right? There's usually not a firewall in between them. Not that that's the only way to do it. But there's rarely 802.1x or VLANs with ACLs applied or any of the other kind of traditional ways to segment networks. It's usually, I've seen as weak as like they just put another router in between, and because the router they've configured to dish out a different block of IP addresses, that's potentially, or that's what they're considering segmentation. Not really security segmentation. Again, a lot of it depends in there, but so they don't know what happened or where it came from. Okay, so FBI, Secret Service are involved. Great. There's some good folks there that should be able to dig into this. One other point I'll bring up that I honestly don't know if it's true or not, but the other kind of pattern that we run into sometimes as incident responders is the data doesn't exist, right? So, and again, I'm not saying this is the case for this township, but what might happen is they had this incident, or I'll just make it more generalized. An organization might have an incident, and we might get called to help dig into that incident and find out who, what, when, where, why, how, right? How did this happen? Who's patient 0? How did it spread? Where did the bad person go? So on. I can't invent log data after the fact, right? If you don't have it, we won't be able to review it. We won't be able to provide guidance on what happened. And that can be very frustrating for some organizations because I think, to be very honest, things like movies and TV shows have really raised our default expectations on what exists. And unfortunately, I should say, fortunately, many things do log some items by default, but that doesn't mean that the logs will go back far enough, right? The logs might overwrite pretty quickly. And again, I'm not saying at all this is what happened here. I don't know. I don't even know if the data will ever come out on this. It's very rare for an organization to admit all of their flaws. But my instinct on this is they might not have all the log data that they would want, ideally. I don't know. But that's my instinct, having dealt with, again, a number of different kinds of organizations of all shapes and sizes. So if you're connected, you're vulnerable. Well, sure. But, what are you going to do if you're going to keep your systems disconnected in a block of concrete buried under the ocean? That's fine, but then no one can use that system. Okay, so they uninstalled TeamViewer. They warned other government organizations. I wonder, the Super Bowl is so close, and this is in the kind of general Tampa Bay area. You just have to wonder if there's any connection. I'm not a tinfoil hat wearer here. I'm just kind of musing and thinking about what could be. So take a hard look at what you have in place. Yeah, I agree with that sentiment, Mr. Seidel. Absolutely, all organizations should. The challenge is that requires money, that requires effort, that requires a champion in an organization. And I can honestly say that even in 2021, it's easier, but it's still not where it should be in terms of organizational maturity. Yeah, so they typically they use a lot. Yep. Okay. So Leslie Carr, actually great Twitter follow, by the way. Leslie is has some really great insight on a lot of things. So I encourage you to look her up on Twitter, connect, and follow her. She's one of the folks I follow as well. She, again, has great insight on a lot of different InfoSec issues. So she's calling out something that happened to Australian Shire. All right, now I'm feeling Lord of the Rings style here when I hear Shire. Again, no offense to our Aussie friends. It's a cool word. We don't run into it a lot here in the US outside of Lord of the Rings. Yeah, so see, Leslie, okay, I'm not totally crazy, folks. Leslie's agreeing with me. She's dealt with entire cities, is only a single IT person. Validated. Promise you, I did not read that beforehand. And you understand their plight, right? Like, I think it's Leslie calling out here, right? They're doing whatever they have to keep water flowing. And this is the important distinction. And I feel like I'm pontificating yet again, but this is the distinction between the focus of your organization and the needs of your organization. The focus of this organization is to keep water flowing and sewage treated. They're going to gear their expertise at that. You don't want me in charge of that. I don't know what I'm doing, but, and Leslie's calling it out here. She's doing a great job. If you don't have the right resources for cybersecurity, and how do you get that? Well, are you going to hire it? Is a 15,000 person municipality in Florida, in the Tampa area, going to fund an InfoSec team? Probably not. They may or may not even have, an IT function in-house. They may outsource that. And again, there's nothing wrong with outsourcing that, going to a managed service provider or someone who does that and helps kind of keep things up and running. But this stuff takes money. It takes effort. It takes a champion. It takes someone in a leadership position. And I don't know who's the right person in this situation. My guess is that it's a number of people. It's the mayor. It's the other authorities in the township. It's the head of the water treatment facility. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, other governmental organizations. They have been saying for years the importance of proactiveness and assessment, and they've made resources available. And there's plenty of good InfoSec person groups. I'd like to think BTB Security is one of them that can help. Help isn't always what you've budgeted for, but don't let that intimidate you. Start down the path. Start trying to get better. And if you don't have the budget for it today, get the plan in place. Communicate outwards and upwards in your organization to get other stakeholders on board. And it might take time. You might have to fight the good fight solo for a while, but this stuff is only going to keep happening worse. And I'm sure it is happening. We just don't hear about it often enough. So I'm going to wrap up there. I think that's enough for the day. This story was on Wired, but you could probably just Google like Florida hacker water supply and find out a variety of stories on it. Wanted to cover that. Thank you for your time. Hopefully you'll join us on the next edition, hopefully next week, of BTB Reacts. Hope you folks like it. Interested in any comments or feedback of other things that we could cover or do. We're going to keep it fun, try to cover some news stories, try to give some insight, and we'll see where this goes. Thanks, folks.